on YouTube. Okay. All right. So, greetings, everyone. It's a pleasure for us to welcome you to this second edition of Steering Africa's Future. My name is Rad Ratuvnariv. I am a Senior Program Management Officer at the United Nations Office of the Special Advisor on Africa. And this knowledge production exercise, which is youth-led and youth-driven, is pegged to the United Nations 2024 Summit of the Future, which is dubbed as a once-in-a-generation moment to transform multilateralism along the lines of what United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres has called. We're bringing in young people from Africa to provide their perspectives through this exercise, focusing on the 5 chapters of the Pact of the Future, which is one of the expected outcome of the Summit of the Future. And we're very pleased to partner with the National African Student Association, or NAFSA, through this exercise and engage with them across these knowledge production series on the key themes being focused on throughout the summit. Today, we have an exciting program, and we have 2 great co-moderators, as well as a presenter who will focus on the theme of international peace and security. To set the stage, it is my privilege to introduce our director, Mr. Jean-Paul Adam, who is our Director for Policy, Monitoring, and Advocacy. Before his role with OSA, JP was also a director with the United Nations Economic Commission on Africa, and he's a former government minister from the Seychelles, and we're very, very privileged to have him join us today. Without further ado, let me turn the floor over to him. JP, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rado, and good morning to everyone. Rado, if I could just ask for your guidance, because I heard you mention peace and security, but I was going to speak more around climate finance, and I just wanted to make sure that we are aligned.
Absolutely. Aline's presentation is the nexus between climate finance and conflict prevention and peace building. So we are fully aligned, JP.
Very good, very good. So thank you very much, and I'm delighted to join the young people who are convening this discussion. As a second one, I was delighted to participate in the one that we had last week, including looking at ways that we can channel investments into the African continent. And I think this is related to the subject at hand. So I'll be speaking briefly with a few remarks on behalf of Undersecretary General Cristina Duarte, the Special Advisor on Africa, to welcome you and to situate this within the Summit for the Future, which is coming up, while also speaking to the technical issues around leveraging climate finance for peace building in conflict-affected states. So the Summit for the Future is coming up in just about 1 week. And this is a moment, it is an inflection point for multilateralism. It really is a moment when we must reconsider the way in which the United Nations work and the way that international development and financing architecture delivers for people who are the most vulnerable and for people who are living in states that are fragile, in states that are affected by conflict. This means a complete rethink of finance in general, but also specifically climate finance. And one of the main aspects that here at the Office on the Special Advisor we have been advocating for is to review the preconception that development finance and as well climate finance should be by default external finance. Of course, official development assistance, aid as we commonly call it, is required. We will not achieve the Sustainable Development Goals unless there is truly an approach that is humanity-driven and not just based on the needs of individual states. But the fundamental change that needs to happen is to deliver predictable access to finance. And this can never occur if it is purely donor-driven. Even the best examples of donor-driven finance leave gaps. Therefore, one of the most transformative actions that can be taken is to deliver on domestic resource mobilization to enhance finance systems within countries, including tackling climate finance and the urgency of climate finance. Turning to conflict-affected states, the delivery of finance must correspond to the urgencies of development and those aspects that allow the state to deliver basic services to the population, allow a functioning economy, and for people to pursue things that we consider human rights. And that includes access to education, to healthcare, and to pursue livelihoods and to be able to care for their families. But already in many cases across the African continent, climate is actually a driver of this conflict. And therefore that investment in those fundamentals is a way of tackling climate change, but also reducing the future risk of conflict. There is a clear correlation between impacts of climate change and conflict across the continent. I will refer you, for example, to the World Meteorological Organization 2021 report on state of the climate in Africa. And that shows that internal displacements across the African continent are closely aligned to regions also facing climate-related challenges. This we can see in the current environment, for example, in the Horn of Africa, as well as in the Sahel. At the basic level, internal displacement and conflict is driven by competition for access to resources. And climate change is now one of the biggest determinants of access to resources, from food to water, as well as economically valuable extractive resources. In these environments of conflict-affected states, it is critical to direct finance for the biggest impact. Something that is important for all states, not only those affected by conflict, is having climate-smart budgeting. And that means being able to allocate resources to the areas that offer the most impact in terms of resilience. And climate-resilient investments are often one of the things that brings the biggest payoff in the medium to long term. I will use an example based on a country that I have worked with. That country was facing challenges of annual flooding, and basically were having to increasingly use money from their contingency funding to tackle the impact of that flooding. They were, in contrast, struggling to be able to invest in things like wetland management. And the money that was being spent on the reaction to the flooding was in the tens of millions of dollars, when you looked at what they needed in terms of wetland management, it was perhaps up to $50,000 per year per wetland system, which would correspond to a total investment of less than $1 million to solve the problem within the country. And in that scenario, investing annually in wetland management reduced the risks of floods very significantly, but also helped to improve agricultural yields. And through the use of climate-smart budgeting, they were able to upfront determine that the value of investing in, for example, wetland management upfront would be much higher than having to then deal with the impact of a disaster, and particularly flooding once it had occurred. This is obviously much harder to do in a conflict-affected state, but it is not impossible, because it is about identifying the biggest drivers of conflict for resources and trying to invest in those elements proactively. So finance that delivers job creation and value, and therefore investing in value chains, then rapidly create opportunities and build resilience, are prime examples of the prioritization that needs to take place. And another example that I will use is that of investing in school feeding systems, which would be anchored in local climate-smart agriculture. Again, you can create a virtuous circle where you create local opportunities by local farmers investing in the production of food that can be used in a system for school feeding at the local level. And school feeding is one of the best ways to ensure that you don't have a lost generation, that you educate equally young girls and boys, and often mitigating the broader impact of conflict on society, while simultaneously tackling climate change by using climate-resilient farming techniques, including ones that maximize savings of water, that use efficient fertilizers, and so on. It is also critical when looking at the priorities for climate finance in ensuring that there is predictable investment in energy and food systems. In the Office of Special Advisor on Africa's Triple Paradox report, which is from 2023, energy and food systems are identified as the main drivers of development. And rapid investment in these sectors are imperative to address the immediate development needs of societies, and that includes in conflict-affected regions. For example, without access to electricity and without reliable food systems, often other businesses and opportunities that could be developed by SMEs are limited. It's impossible or very difficult, for example, to do simple food processing unless there is reliable access to energy. And these are aspects that therefore are essential for revamping the African economic model, moving away from simple extraction of resources for export or for resale, and building value chains that are based on value addition, that involve more people in that value chain, and which depend on access to affordable energy. And on the question of the investing in energy, the urgency should be the priority, and therefore, what is the quickest way that you can connect people to sources of energy, and not simply energy that allows them to have a light, but energy that allows them to be economically productive. And that does mean looking at the immediate urgency while also planning for the long term. And where renewables particularly are going to be important in Africa will actually be, in addition to the climate benefit, will actually be the predictability of the cost. One of the biggest challenges for African countries in the post-COVID-19 pandemic era and in the context of the war in Ukraine has been the largely fluctuating prices of fossil fuel-based energy resources and the impact that this has on inflation and the impact that this has on the wider economic systems within these countries. Crucially, we also need to reflect on natural resource governance as one of the aspects in terms of improving climate finance in conflict-related areas. Quite often, conflict-affected countries are dealing with internal and external pressures which are relating to their natural resources, whether these resources are mineral-based or fossil fuels. And the critical component to long-term climate resilient development is effectively addressing the governance of natural resources and ensuring that that the resources that are generated from these productions are invested in local communities. One of the questions that I'm often asked is, are there opportunities for innovative finance in conflict-affected countries? There are mechanisms such as debt for climate swaps or debt for development swaps, which in some cases can liberate financing that is currently going towards debt servicing, towards investment in something which is investing in climate resilience. And therefore, if you use, for example, the school feeding example, that can also mitigate the impact of conflict and support populations in conflict-affected areas. But one of the crucial ingredients is to ensure that there is long-term financing system being created and not one-off financing. So one of the positive areas potentially around debt swaps is, for example, you could use the proceeds to create a trust fund, which then creates long-term flows. The danger is to undertake a transaction which creates some debt relief, but doesn't create flows over a longer period into climate resilience. Carbon markets have also been mentioned as a potential area of financing innovation and where Africa has huge potential. In conflict-affected areas, this may not be the most ideal because the lack of certainty will undermine the effective use of such mechanisms. However, in some countries, carbon market-related activities have been used to effectively channel finance to at-risk communities as a means of paying for ecosystem services. I will give you an example from Kenya called Mikoko Pamoja, where local communities have been protecting mangroves, and the offsets in terms of carbon absorption that has been generated from this are used to pay for local education services. Again, the challenge within conflict-affected areas is to ensure that these kinds of interventions can be done routinely and are not disrupted and is one of the key ingredients to having successful carbon finance. And I will conclude with some key issues to be tackled on climate finance at the global level, and therefore which are critical for the debate around the Summit for the Future. The first principle is predictable finance and at scale. And this is directly aligned with the goal of having a new quantifiable goal for climate finance at the next Conference of Parties, which will be meeting in Azerbaijan. It is important that we set a global target for financing which is realistic, but which is also not defined simply by what is available, but by the real need which is put forward by countries and which will allow countries to achieve climate resilience. And that includes investments in adaptation as well as in mitigation and dealing with the priority as well of loss and damage. Where we are currently is that a lot of these instruments of climate finance have been created, such as the Loss and Damage Fund, but the feeding of finance into these funds remains suboptimal. There is a need to address the needs of the most vulnerable with urgency, and hence also redefining access to financing on the basis of this vulnerability and not on other criteria. And this requires an urgent reform of the multilateral development banks, but also more broadly of the Bretton Woods system. It also means empowering institutions within those regions. For example, within Africa, we need to have more resources that are available for institutions such as the African Development Bank. And this could be achieved by reforms in the system of transferring what are called special drawing rights. And these are essentially the reserve currency of the IMF and the World Bank. And one of the key initiatives being put forward by African countries is for these resources to be channeled towards regional institutions like the African Development Bank. We also need to ensure that past promises are delivered on. The 100 billion, unfortunately, has been off track since it was announced. And one of the priorities in terms of being able to move forward effectively on this is to be realistic about the goals that we set going forward. And that does not mean setting lower goals. The requirements are in many multipliers of the 100 billion. The needs are very high, but the key is about investing in multipliers. The key for successful financing is investing in areas that then help to create their own finance. And I used the example previously of investing in energy and food systems, because usually they will also generate their own opportunities by creating entrepreneurial opportunities and creating multipliers for the investments. It is also essential that we de-risk investment in Africa and other vulnerable regions, because these investments are currently seen as unattractive in terms of foreign direct investment, but they are also often unattractive because of this risk perception that is created around Africa, and they are unattractive even for internal investment. So one of the biggest challenges would be to empower African institutional investors, such as pension funds and a number of banks across the region, to actually invest more in climate resilient future for Africa. And that includes energy systems and food systems in particular. So thank you very much for having given me the floor to share these few perspectives, to welcome you on behalf of the Under-Secretary General, but also to share these perspectives on climate finance. And I very much look forward to follow the debate and the discussion that will happen today, and to take some of those ideas also in the future discussions on the Summit for the Future, to emphasize that this does not end with the conclusion of the agreement. On the contrary, the challenge is in implementation. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. John Paul. Good morning, afternoon, and evening, everyone, and welcome to our session for today. As previously mentioned, this is the second session of the Steering Africa's Future series, and today our theme is international peace and security. And our esteemed youth scholar, Aline Abayo, will be presenting her research titled Leveraging Climate Finance for Peace Building. By way of introduction, I am Deborah Latsam-Sodenis. I am from Northeast Nigeria, and I am the Strategic Partnerships Research Manager at the National African Student Association. My 8-year career is centered within the intersections of humanitarianism, policy advocacy, and health equity. I am a graduate of NYU Wagner, so shout out to all the Wagners and Violets out there. I will be your co-moderator for today. I will let my colleague Elvis introduce himself, and then we both will give you a bit of a background on the National African Student Association. Elvis, over to you.
Hello, guys. We are happy to have all of you guys here and discussing and talking more about Africa. My name is Elvis Amin. I am South Sudanese, and I am originally from Salt Lake City, Utah. I came here to New York City in the past year, studying real estate finance and investment at NYU SHAC. A key thing I'm a part of over there, as well as the Urban Lab, where we discuss infrastructure and investment into emerging markets and economies with the high focus of Africa. And I'm also a member of NAFSA, and I'm excited to be here today and excited to discuss more about Alina's presentation and seeing where this conversation takes us and how we can further and help Africa grow in the next step.
Thank you, Elvis, and thank you again, everyone, for joining us today. We are excited to introduce you to the National African Student Association, or NAFSA. The National African Student Association is an organization founded in 2017 with the goal of supporting African students in the US diaspora. Our mission is to provide resources and opportunities to help African students succeed, both professionally, academically, and culturally.
Exactly. We do this through a variety of events, programs, and initiatives that align with our 5 core objectives. These include transition assistance, helping African students adjust to life in the US and thrive during their time here. Also, helping them transition through various academic and professional milestones. Secondly, cultural awareness, celebrating and sharing African cultures while encouraging students to stay focused and connected to their roots. Third thing is community service, engaging in meaningful projects that give back to local and global communities. And the fourth thing is our chapter development, strengthening our high school and college campus chapters to focus on growth and collaboration across different institutions. And lastly, our 5th point is we focus on career development, providing professional resources and opportunities to help students advance in their careers.
Now, earlier this year in April, we launched an exciting new research initiative in collaboration with the United Nations Office of the Special Advisor on Africa, and that is why we're here today. Now, this project aims to amplify African youth voices in the realm of policymaking and influence important conversations such as this one. Several of our students are currently working on impactful projects as part of this initiative.
And today, we're proud to have Aline Abayo sharing her incredible work with us. If you're interested in getting involved with our research initiative or learning more about NAFSA, please don't hesitate to reach out. We'll be dropping an email in the chat for anyone who wants some more information.
Thank you again for your time, and we hope to connect with many of you soon. We will be taking questions through the chat feature as the presentation progresses. So please feel free to drop your questions and we will get to them during the Q&A session. Now, without any further ado, we will move into the presentation. Aline, take up the floor, please introduce yourself and get into the presentation. Try sharing your screen now so that we can check to see that everything is going on okay.
Okay, amazing. Yeah, I'll get started. So my name is Aline Abayo, and I'm a master's student. I'm a master's candidate in the Energy and Resource Group at UC Berkeley, and my research is mostly around climate finance and the economics of climate change. I am very excited to present this work on leveraging climate finance for peace building. And in this presentation, we're mostly going to explore how targeted climate finance initiative can not only address environmental challenges, but also play a crucial role in peace building. I'll be mostly focusing on examples from countries in Africa, mostly because that's where my research is focused, where climate action and peace building intersect or could potentially intersect. Thank you so much, Jean-Paul, for a great introduction on climate finance. That was amazing. And I feel like we're on the same page for what's coming in the presentation. I'll get right into the content. For an agenda today, first I'll give you an overview of the current climate finance landscape. I'm sure Jean-Paul has already said a lot of it, so you probably would be hearing some repeating messages. And then we'll dive into the role of carbon markets in Africa and how climate finance could be directed to both environmental and peace building objectives. And now that I've heard Jean-Paul talk, I hope to change a few ideas on carbon markets as a tool as well for conflict-affected states. And I'll kind of walk you through during the presentation, I'll walk you through how that tool could be used. Finally, we'll look at how peace Corps benefits could be instrumental in shaping policies, as well as financing mechanisms or methodologies. Okay. For the introduction and background, I will be explaining why climate finance and peace building must go hand in hand. And as we approach the year 2050, the global community is more focused to achieving the Paris Agreement targets, and these targets are critical for limiting the global temperature rise below 2 degrees, ideally aiming for 1.5 compared to pre-industrial levels, of course. But it is very important to recognize that not all countries are on equal footing when it comes to climate action. In particular, conflict-affected states face significant challenges that often excludes them from large-scale climate finance mechanisms or initiatives. It's very important to recognize that strong institutions are a basis for climate finance. So they're a basis for climate projects to succeed. So in absence of these strong institutions, which are usually absent in conflict-affected states, it's very hard, even impossible, to kind of just manage all mitigation, adaptation, as well as building resilient systems. As well as, again, as Jean-Paul mentioned, international financial institutions, multilaterals, and investors tends to see these regions as high risk, limiting their access to funds necessary to mitigate and adapt to climate change. In this presentation, I hope to change this narrative, the idea that the conflict-affected states are high risk, especially for carbon markets projects. Yeah, I'll be talking more about that in the next slides. And though these are all really not opportunities, really, they could also present another side. There are challenges, but they could present a unique opportunity for integrating climate finance and peace building. Climate projects, when implemented strategically, they could serve as a tool for peace building by improving livelihood of communities and as well as stabilizing economies. And in this presentation, where I'll talk about peace building, we'll come mostly with, again, improved standard of living, improved financial stability. All of these are aspects that a nation has to think about when they're planning for peace building objectives. For instance, I'll use an example of maybe a sustainable agriculture project or renewable energy project that create economic opportunities, which could in turn like reduce the appeal of armed conflicts. So as we continue through this presentation and after the presentation as well, it is important to ask ourselves, how can we ensure that conflict-affected states are not left behind, and what mechanism needs to be developed or improved so these states can continue to benefit and contribute to global climate frameworks. Before getting deeper into the presentation, I'll first define what I mean by when I say conflict-affected states. So an easy definition would be economies or nations where peace building is the main priority. But again, as an official definition by the EU, conflict-affected states are defined as areas in a state of armed conflict fragile post-conflict areas, as well as areas witnessing weak or non-existing governance and security, such as failed states and widespread and systematic violation of international law, including human rights abuses. Long definition, but basically it will mostly agree with the first one that I gave. It's economies where peace building is a main priority. To narrow the research down, we focused mostly on DRC and South Sudan as examples. So you'll be hearing me talk about them quite a lot in the presentation. Giving you a little bit of the background on the global climate finance landscape. In 2022, the total of $32 billion US dollars was invested globally into climate finance initiatives. And this may sound like a lot of money, but we need to recognize that much of this funding was mostly concentrated in developed regions, and developed countries and economies tend to receive the bulk of this climate finance because they usually have the necessary infrastructure and governance structures to attract these investments, which is unfortunately not the case for conflict-affected states. And these regions are mostly just the most vulnerable and to the impacts of climate change, as we know, and as well to political instability as well. And again, as we mentioned multiple times here, and they're mostly often left behind when we're thinking of climate finance. One quote that I like from the crisis group, they found that conflict-affected states receive a third of climate financing compared with countries without conflict, free of conflict. So if you look at this chart right here, you could see this blue line for these are conflict-affected states. On average, per capita, they receive less than almost a third of what other conflict-free countries receive, and this is very concerning. So climate finance has the potential to transform economies and promote sustainable development, and conflict-affected states still remains on the margin. This usually creates a significant gap in global climate goals and promoting inclusive growth as well. So mostly when we worked on this project, we were thinking of like one thing to focus on, and we thought it was carbon markets were a good way, for us to kind of think more about climate finance. So from now on, I'll just be, when I talk about climate finance, it's mostly carbon markets as a tool to promote peace building. So, and when it gets to carbon markets, we didn't necessarily work on compliance markets. Just to narrow the research down, we were just working on voluntary carbon markets. So voluntary carbon markets are a growing mechanism in Africa to finance climate finance, and they allow businesses and individuals to offset their emissions through the purchase and the sale of carbon credits. So, and Africa is a resource-rich country, and not just that, there's multiple ways to make sure that voluntary carbon markets are thriving on the continent. And these usually, like the natural resource-rich countries are ideal for carbon sequestration, which Africa is. Over the past few years, I think the UN has put out multiple initiatives to improve carbon markets, and Africa Carbon Markets Initiative, ACMI, is one of them, and they're doing really great work to promote. They're doing really great work, and their goals is to unlock 6 billion in revenue annually by 2030, and they're doing so much capacity building. So I think they're going to be we're going to get more from them, and I'm very excited to see what they come up with. So the challenges for conflict-affected states, it's usually limited participation in the program because of weak institution frameworks, and mostly the potential for peace building in here is that carbon markets usually offers a dual benefit. It's mostly environmental sustainability as well as economic efforts, but also on the other side, it fosters social cohesion in post-building, in post-conflict regions, as we're thinking of, as the country is thinking of more development, usually like it eases post conflict building. And if you could see on the chart right here, this is a really nice graph. It shows where most projects are concentrated, and this is by just Gold Standard, which is one of the main registries where voluntary carbon markets could be registered. So it's very clear right now that you could see the concentration here. Kenya has so many projects, at least registered under Gold Standard. But again, like when we get to the middle, it's a little bit empty, and in the north is, we could see the disparities in just this one graph. So diving deeper into the market, into the carbon markets in Africa specifically, and this data is all from the Berkeley Carbon Trading Project, which I also work on. We do publish the database quarterly, but yeah, this data is mostly from that database. So Africa has 1,928 voluntary carbon market projects. Most of them are listed under Gold Standard and Vera, which is about 21% of all projects globally. This seems like a big number, but it's only like when we look at not just the total count of projects, but mostly the issuances. So the amount of credits that are issued to each project, we found out that it's only 13.62%. It moves from 21% to 13%. So looking at the distribution here, you could see that Sub-Saharan Africa has 20.8% of all the total number of projects, as well as this amount of credits issued. It's still, I think it's still like a lot of it's still a good chunk on the global share, but yeah. So going deeper into the issuances, I have this graph here for issuance by type, which shows that most of the main credits issued are under RED Plus. Here, which is 47.2%, and cookstoves as well. So there is lack of diversity in terms of projects that are on the continent right now. And both of these RED Plus and cookstoves have been criticized for overcrediting, which means they are claiming more credits than they're claiming more carbon than they actually reduce. Yeah, as we've seen also in the database, there is like a growing share of energy projects, which tends to be usually higher quality in terms of, at least there haven't been any criticism over overcrediting. So looking at this chart right here, this is, and I'm getting into like the numbers, we do see lots of retirements. We do have more. These are issuances in the green one. The blue one is retirement. So we do still see like a bit of a huge difference in terms of issuances and retirements. And this is not specific to Africa. It's about the market in general, but I just wanted to highlight that trend. Okay, going into the retired, most of the retired credits are still RED Plus and cookstove, mostly because, again, they're the most issued, so they're the most that are actually available on the market to purchase. And again, they've been like a growing share of RED Plus, followed by cookstoves, because there is still more on the market, but we could also see a little bit of renewables right here, which are gaining a bit of steam in the past few years. Okay. Moving into the country-specific projects, And again, if you, I didn't have like the charts on here, but usually conflict affected states tend to have less credits. But now I'm just getting deeper into the specific countries, which I'm going to talk about DRC and South Sudan. So for DRC, has 44 projects listed under Gold Standard and Vera. 24 projects are cook stove, which is not very surprising, and 10 of them are Red Plus. And if I haven't said, the Red Plus is reducing emissions from deforestation and forest degradation in developing countries. We also do have 4 projects on afforestation, reforestation, 3 on hydropower, 2 solar, and then 1 improved forest management. Though we have 44 projects, only 7 of them has actually generated credits. And this is a really low number if projects are just being registered without creating actual credits that could be traded. It's a worrying trend. Only 5 projects have retirement, but also it's not surprising since only 7 of them actually generated credits. So on this chart right here, you could see also we still see the same trend of having more issuances than retirements. But I think this was a little bit of an outlier because it was one project that just got issued so many credits. But yeah, we still see the differences in issuances and retirements. Okay, going on the project specific. One project that I really, really wanted to highlight is Matebe hydroelectric plant. And this is kind of a dashboard of the project in general. It's a run-of-river type of hydropower. It's small hydro, 13.41 megawatts from 3 turbines. It's located in North Kivu, which has been to be an active area of conflict. So this project VCS, as you could see in here, it's registered under Vera, and it has generated. These are how much credit has generated over time, as well as the ones that have been retired. So this project has had so much impact, and it's kind of a success story that I wanted to highlight here. It provided 30,000 people with affordable, renewable electricity in rural areas, improving living conditions, standards of living. And also it gave 2,020 local jobs and powered 350 SMEs and small institutions, which stimulated economic growth again. And I'll tie all of these aspects to peace building in the next few minutes, because again, as I talked about when we're thinking about renewable powering communities, it kind of has a direct aspect of peace building onto it. Those are parts that a country or a nation has to look forward to when they're thinking of the peace building plan and the community supporting. Also, it fostered technology transfer. I think this was one of the turbines and the hydro system was among the first one to use that kind of technology in Africa. So it was a good technology transfer story. It also offered community support. So this hydropower plant offered free electricity to public institutions and supported local entrepreneurs and with financial access. And as I mentioned earlier, all these contribute to multiple aspects of peace building through economic stability, social cohesion, and improved livelihood. And this not only helps in peace building, but also in post-conflict building as well. Okay, yeah. Going on South Sudan has just one project in VCM, so we could see kind of the disparity out here. It's one cookstove project registered under Vera. It's called VCS 3200 in case anyone wants to look it up. It's a cookstove project. It has no issuances or retirements yet, but we could see the cook stoves that we'll be installing. So this, needless to say, have one cookstove one project in the whole like VCM markets isn't the best, especially for a country that's trying to build. And so if you're an investor and you're looking to invest somewhere, this is your place. Yeah. So the case for Peace Co-benefit. While the concept of Peace Co-benefit is still largely theoretical, there haven't been much work on it academically. It presents like both, it presents compelling framework on how climate finance can be used to achieve both environmental and social resilience. And Peace Co-benefits, if I was trying to explain it, it's like having investments that could be like two-edged, could just be dual benefits. It does have an aspect of climate resilience or climate change on it, but also could do could also be helping in peace building as well. It has that dual aspect. And this usually when a project has that much impact, it usually raises the quality of that carbon. Traditionally climate finance has solely focused on mitigating and adapting to environmental impacts to climate change. However, recent studies by Wong in 2022 found that the changing climate is also a social phenomenon affecting communities, economies, and political stability as well. What this means is that climate finance needs to be efficiently allocated, not only to address environmental issues, but also to promote social stability in vulnerable regions. And by incorporating peace building into climate finance framework, we could help stabilize conflict-affected regions to prevent future conflicts arising or just being fueled by environmental degradation. Also, like looking at on the other side of high quality carbon projects, when investing in a conflict-affected state, the limited institutional structure in itself kind of adds on a layer of additionality, and when you pair that with co-benefit, you just get a really high quality. You get really high quality carbon projects, which also could turn into good, when you're selling the credits, could turn into like a good investment. This approach again, like combining both peace building aspects into carbon markets, result in long lasting impacts, not just cutting emissions, but also strengthening community bonds and building sustainable economies. And while Peace Corps benefits are still in conceptual phases, and we're still keeping working on this, we're going to work on this project for longer to kind of know more, and to kind of know more about what it means to kind of actually measure Peace Corps benefits and what specific SDGs to target. The potential for these benefits to transform how we approach climate action and conflict resolution is just immense. This shift could turn vulnerable regions into climate leaders by leveraging climate finance to reduce emission, but also just do the other side of fostering cohesion and contributing to peace building. And before I would conclude, I want to talk about the idea of conflict-affected states being highly risky. And again, at least from my understanding, when we're investing, especially when we're thinking of carbon markets, a good investment is actually a high-quality credit. And again, as now that we have the remote sensing technologies and the results-based financing for carbon markets and new methodologies that could easily adapt to conflict-affected states, I don't think it's still something that investors need to worry about, especially when they're looking at carbon markets projects. So I'm approaching the end of my presentation. If you have any questions, again, feel free to add them in the chat. So one of the last ideas that I would want to talk about is mostly building a framework for action. So the first idea for this framework would be the changing narrative. I've talked a little bit about the changing narrative, the moving from it's highly risky to more of it's a good investment. Because again, I believe it is. It's a crucial shift. It's crucial to shift the perception that investing in carbon markets in conflict of affected regions is inherently risky. We've seen successful cases that are producing really high quality credits and actually doing really good co-benefits as well, contributing to the communities and contributing to peace building efforts. Also, one other idea is leveraging risk mitigation tools, using finance tools such as blended finance that combines public and private capital could reduce investment risk. This goes again to what Jean-Paul said about multilaterals de-risking investments to kind of spur more private sector in the climate finance areas. Also, partnering with international organizations can offer guarantees and insurance mechanisms to protect investors against political and financial instability. This again goes into the de-risking aspect of investments. One last thing that would be a great recommendation is diversifying project portfolios. As we've seen, the projects mostly in Africa are mostly REDD+ and cook stoves. And we would love to see more renewable energy geared projects that not only would just electrifying communities. Not that I'm saying that cook stoves are not amazing projects, they are amazing. But again, kind of diversifying the projects to make sure the investments and the sector is changing narratives and everything doesn't affect the market as much. So yeah, that was the third one. And I will conclude saying that climate finance is a powerful tool, as I've explained in the past few minutes. It could promote both sustainability and peace, could reduce emissions, and then have the greatest benefits of just peace building, basically. And conflict-affected states have so much untapped opportunities because, again, some investors really think it's highly risky, but I've hopefully convinced you that it's actually a great investment. And my last call to action is saying invest in regions that actually need it the most for global sustainability and stability. Yeah, I will end by acknowledging John Moore from Africa Awareness Week. They were amazing in the mentorship, Dr. Ethel Verin, Dr. Samuel Rivingston, and the team at the Berkeley Carbon Trading Project. All the data we used in this research are mostly associated with them, in the National African Student Association, as well as the UN Office for Special Advisor on Africa. Yeah, that's all I had. Thank you so much for listening to me.
Thank you so much, Arlene, for such an interesting and informative presentation. We are excitedly looking forward to your findings. And please, can you drop your questions in the chat if you have any for Arlene? Her presentation has been really informative. And while we wait for more questions to get into the chat, Arlene, can you please let us and other African youth know how they can follow your work, connect or contribute to your research as it unfolds?
Yeah, absolutely. If anyone would like to talk more about the project, please reach out to me on LinkedIn. My name, Arlene Abayo, and we can have a chat about the project and potentially you could join us.
Great. Elvis?
Yes, Arlene, thank you again for your presentation. I really liked it, and I think many of us who are sitting today's panel really enjoyed it. That being said, we're now turning the time over to our Q&A session, and I did have some questions to kind of start out this area of the conversation. And so these are two questions, and I would love to see how you answer them. One is, what policy frameworks or financial mechanisms do you recommend to reduce the perceived risk of investing in climate projects in conflict-affected regions? And secondly, in your opinion, what role should governments and international organizations play in fostering the development of carbon markets, specifically tailored to conflict-affected areas?
Yeah. I'll start with the second one and then I'll go to the first question. So what role should governments and multilaterals play? One thing that I need would be great in terms of market development would mostly be capacity building. I'm not sure if many people are aware or kind of like have had the necessary skills to actually know how easy or how doable it is to kind of do a climate project and actually list your credits on registry basically. So I think his capacity building would be one of them, and it would be a great investment for the government as well. And because that was the same for multilateral, I know the UN is doing amazing work in terms of that through ACMI and other initiatives. But yeah, I think that's how I would answer the question. Would you mind reminding me the first one?
Sorry, yes. So the first question is, so what policy or frameworks or financial mechanisms do you recommend to reduce the perceived risks of investing in climate projects in these conflict areas?
I think multilaterals are kind of our best bet. I'm still hopeful that they could potentially de-risk these investments, because if they go in and invest just a little bit of it, it can show how the idea would work. I think it would bring in more investors, so that could be one of them. Yeah, I think that could be one of them.
Okay, thank you. And now we'll turn it over to our Q&A. If there's any questions asked or anybody has any questions, we'd love to ask Aline. Also, Aline, you can unshare your screen right now. We can head back to the general panel.
Amazing. Thank you again, everyone, for joining us. We are still expecting more of your questions in the chat. I have one here. So Aline, to your presentation and Jean Paul's introduction speech, it is crucial for Africa's policymakers to reimagine investing in carbon markets on the continent. So what are some of the patterns that you have started to see in your research with regards to possibilities of investment, and what are the new approaches to climate finance and peace building do you think policymakers should start considering?
Yeah, amazing question. As I mentioned a little bit in my presentation, I think we're starting to see the need to diversify the portfolios of the continent in terms of credits. We do have enough, not enough, basically. We do have a lot of only 2 project types, and there is multiple. There is probably like 50 other options that could be great again for Africa, but aren't being done now. So I think that could be a great way. And one really good example I always use is renewable energy. There's still multiple places to invest in solar, wind, and mini hydro as well. So yeah, I think that would be one of them.
Yes, Elvis, sorry.
No worries. I'm very interested in this type of conversation, so I have another question to ask. And so, what lessons can be drawn from the successful carbon market initiatives like the Matebe hydroelectric plant, the DRC, for future projects in these conflict-affected areas?
Yeah, I think one common thread that at least I've seen in projects that are really doing amazing work in Africa is just involving local individuals in the projects, kind of making sure that that not just the internationals are working on the projects, but also having local organization partners local developers get involved in the project as well. So I think that's one really great thing to do. That's basically very important for a successful project.
And this is a great follow-up question to ask upon that is how can these local communities then be engaged in these climate finance projects to ensure their actual effectiveness on a practical basis?
Would you mind repeating the question?
So it's practically asking how can local communities be engaged in this? So how can they participate to actually see the effectiveness of this?
I think the answer to that would just be also like starting climate based projects would be a good one of them. As if maybe you're youth and you see like a problem in your community and be like, oh, I could do this could lower emissions and could still present like jobs, could be like a good way to promote peace. I think that's one way absolutely to do that.
Okay,
Amazing. Amazing. Thank you. There were some comments in the chat and I will read them out. This is from the director, Jean Paul, and he said, great presentation, Aline, for carbon markets in conflict affected states. He shared a few considerations and I'll read them out. The development of the institutional framework nationally for carbon credits is important, such as through a national registry. The risk for low capacity countries is that they allow many credits to be issued in their name without the quality. Wow. And then the second point he made is the risks of investors or
I think Deborah's connection might have went off. I will just pick up where she left off. And so the risk for low capacity countries is that they allow many credits to be issued in their name without the quality. The risk of investors or promoters defining the area of intervention are always aligned with local community priorities. And then, but these challenges are not the reason to not do them. The UN has supported the development of a regional registry for the Congo Basin, for example, to create a common standard for carbon registries. And so that was what Director Jean-Paul Adam had to say. And then after that, again, we will like to invite those who are interested in NAFSA to participate and to be a part of this. Obi dropped our contact information right below. And I'll turn it back over to you, Deborah. I think you're muted, by the way. I'm sorry.
Yeah, sorry, my internet froze a little bit. Thank you everyone for such a wonderful session. At this juncture, I will turn it back to Mr. Rado, and we really appreciate you for being here today. Over to you, Mr. Rado.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Deborah and Elvis, and congratulations, Aline. I would just like to acknowledge once again the input from our director, Mr. Jean-Paul Adam. And I also wanted to give a warm welcome to our resident coordinator in the Gambia, who has connected to listening to us today. And he sends his greetings and sends his congratulations to you, all the young people who contributed today. So it's great, RC, and thank you very much for your encouragement and feedback. If we would like to try Elvis and Deborah before we move to the next segment, I see that there is one participant who has raised her hand. Miss Amanda Tanwi, I hope I am pronouncing that correctly. We will try, if technical connections allow, to give you the floor. I just gave you the permission to speak. And if you wish to take the floor and are able now, Amanda, please go ahead and do that. We'll give you a couple of minutes, a few seconds actually, to take the floor if you are able. If you are not, then I will move on to the next segment of our engagement today, which is a closing / wrap up by my colleague Ben Ogbona, who is the outreach co-director from NAFSA. And Ben will see us out essentially, and we'll conclude our engagement today. Just before giving Ben the floor, allow me to remind that we have another engagement on the 23rd of September. So feel free to follow us on social media and follow NAFSA as well on social media for the connection details. In case you have missed the exchange today, it is recorded and available on the OSA YouTube channel. And if you would like to go back to our exchange last week, that is also available on the OSA YouTube channel. And once again, congratulations, Aline. Thank you very much, Deborah and Elvis. And over to you, Benjamin.
Thank you so much, Rado. It's truly a pleasure to be here. It's always exciting to hear the youth talk about the impactful work that they're doing on the continent. Just a brief introduction about myself. My name is Benjamin Obona, but I go by Obi, and I am the current National African Student Association Outreach Co-Director. So I focus on providing strategic partnerships with various organizations to maximize the amount of benefits that we can provide to the members that we have across the U.S. diaspora. It's truly exciting. I've been a part of this organization for the last 5 years, and it's exciting to see how much we've grown thus far. Outside of being the outreach co-director, I'm currently a student myself, studying biomedical engineering at Johns Hopkins University. So I focus a lot on studying and doing research in medical imaging and AI. So going back, I just want to say thank you to Aline for her impactful presentation. I think it was really insightful, and we all learned a lot about climate finance, specifically in the Congo region. And I just want to thank the moderators, Deborah and Elvis. They did an amazing job of leading and coordinating this entire webinar. But it just goes to show that the youth are willing to support, and the youth are willing to talk about the work that they're doing. They're doing such impactful work on the continent, whether it's in the space of sustainability or renewable energy. Just in our previous webinar, we had a couple students or a couple graduate students talk about their work in venture capitalism. So we have a lot of students working on a variety of different projects, and just goes to show how willing the students are to support and elevate and provide insight into different affairs pertaining to the continent. And we're just really excited that we're continuing to do this research work. Right now, we have the research initiative focusing on sustainable development for sustainable peace building. But we are looking to expand and do research in other areas, whether it's tech in Africa or financing for development, things of that nature. So we're continuing to expand because we're aware that there are so many students within our network that are doing impactful research, and we want to give them platforms like these to showcase their work, get more stakeholders on their projects, and just increase the amount of influence they have on the continent. So if you're interested in learning more about our program, learning more about our research and what we can provide and what we can do, please don't hesitate to reach out to us. We're always looking to get more stakeholders, get more people who are willing to support the work that the youth are doing within our network. But again, this was really insightful. And it just goes to show, I just want to conclude by, it just goes to show that we, the youth, are willing to put in the work to make a difference and positively impact the continent. So again, please reach out. I already put our contact information in the chat, but please reach out if you have any more questions about the work we're doing and how you can assist. And thank you so much, OSA, for providing us, the youth, a platform for us to excel and succeed, and providing exposure to the work we're doing. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Obi. Thank you, NAFSA, for the great partnership. And thank you to all of your viewers and listeners, either who connected live here on Zoom or who are following us through the YouTube live stream. Before I conclude, I just wanted to mention that the Youth Action Days at the Summit of the Future are coming up at the end of the week, on the 19th and on the 20th of September. I put the link in the chat where you can find more information about the events, the activities, and a lineup of the participants scheduled to engage. Please check that out. And once again, we will meet here again on the 23rd of September at 9 a.m. New York local time for the third and final session of this knowledge production exercise. Once again, thank you all. It has been a privilege to have this exchange with you, and we will see you next time. All the best. Bye, everybody.